Welcome guys, this is your friend Naruto Addict 3.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto was the last Jedi of the Hidden Leaf? Naruto x Tenten x Star Wars Part 2. As Sakura was carrying Sasuke back into Tezuna's now Swiss cheese looking home, someone else was being carried back in Konoha. The third Hokage was being carried over to his couch after a certain Toad Sanin punched him. What could have caused this, you ask? Let's go back in time about 30 minutes to see. Flashback 30 minutes earlier. The third side as he was signing his name to another stupid sheet of useless paperwork. He was thinking how he is too old for this shit and wished for an interruption. As if his prayers were answered, he felt a presence arrive on his window sill and he smiled, knowing only one person arrives like that. The third said, "It's good to see you finally arrived, Jiraiya." Jiraiya came in the window and said, "So you really were looking for me? To what do I owe the pleasure that you would send out 3 different units of ABNU looking for me?" The third said, "Someone has been looking for you ever since he has returned." Jiraiya said, "A lot of people are looking for me, but what makes this person so important for you to summon me?" The third said, "He's the son of your former student." That stopped Jiraiya, who was on his way back toward the window, and he turned and said, "Explain what you mean, you old coot. You told me he was dead." The third sighed and said, "Well, the thing is, I lied to protect him, but it was a mistake." Jiraiya said, "I can understand protecting him from his dad's enemies, but why was it a mistake?" The third said, "You met him when he was a few days old, but I told you his name I gave him based on his mother's maiden name." Jiraiya thought for a moment and looked at the third and said, "The Kyuubi brat." The third nodded and said, "Yes. He returned a little over a month ago and has followed in his family steps." Jiraiya said, "You mean he is a strong ninja? I can believe that." The third said, "You misunderstand me. He is a ninja and is getting stronger, but he is a Jedi like both his parents." Jiraiya looked at the third pissed and said, "How?" The third said, "When he was 5, I took him to a ship his parents sat for him and he took it and met his mother. She trained him until 2 years ago when she was killed by the same people who caused Kyuubi to attack." Jiraiya nodded and said, "So why does he want to see me?" The third said, "His mother Elisa told him to find you when he returns, however that's not the only reason I called you here." Jiraiya said, "Really? What else?" The third said, "He is looking for his only known living relative, but I know he has 2 living relatives. He does not know it and I have been lying to him about it, but the time has come for them to know." Jiraiya said, "What does this have to do with me?" The third said, "One of his relatives is your former teammate Tsunade. I known the truth because I helped keep her secret all these years." Jiraiya said, "But she never had a kid." The third said, "She actually had 1 kid and I told him on his wedding day who his parents are, but never told them out of respect for their wishes." Jiraiya thought for a moment and said, "So Arashi was Tsunade's kid. If I had known, then I could have ragged her about it. Man, the blackmail I missed." The third coughed and said, "Yes, that is one of his 2 remaining relatives, but his grandfather is also alive." Jiraiya said, "Really, who is it? I want to kick his for not being there for Arashi. That boy was like the kid I never had." The third said, "Funny you should say that. His father actually is you." End flashback. Jiraiya looked at the third, who was holding his nose to stop the blood, and said, "That's not funny, you old coot." The third said, "It is not a joke. Remember when Dan died and Tsunade started drinking and you both shared a night together?" Jiraiya thought back and after a few minutes said, "Yeah, I remember barely, but I thought it was a drunken dream." The third said, "It was not, and Tsunade became pregnant with Arashi then." Jiraiya said, "But why did she abandon him and how come she never told me?" The third said, "We were at war and Tsunade did not want to tell you she was pregnant because when she found out she had done left the village vowing to never return. She did return when she entered her 9th month of pregnancy, and it was during that time that Iwa attacked Konoha itself. Tsunade worked herself into exhaustion and passed out, which caused her to go into labor. I had to deliver the baby myself, and after she woke and saw all the wounded and could not feel the child any longer, feared the worst and thought he was dead. Jiraiya said, and you let her believe it. The third said, I did not see here for 12 years, and by that time Arashi was already a ninja and training under you. I chose to sit back and let things along. Jiraiya said, left things alone, are you out of your mind? First I find out that you let me and Tsunade both live our lives without our son, and then had a chance to make it better for our grandson and then screwed his life up also. I am out of here. The third said, where are you going? Jiraiya said, I am going to find Tsunade and tell her just enough to get her back her so you can explain everything. The third paled as he left and thought to himself, I guess I will see you Aegean, my young friend, real soon. The next day back in Wave Country, both Team 7 and 9 were sitting on the bridge watching the entire village come out and help with the bridge. Thanks to Guy and Lee's power of youth, they were able to tell everyone in the village in a few minutes about Gato's death. Haku and Zabuza were back up but were talking with Kakashi. Sasuke was brooding with bruises all over his body and could not walk without a pair of crutches that Kakashi got somewhere, and Sakura was pampering him, or should I say bugging the hell out of him for a date. Neji was practicing his katas for the gentle fist style, and Lee and Guy were helping carry support beams around the construction site. Naruto and Tenten were currently down on the water practicing with their lightsabers while waterwalking. Naruto blocked a slash from the left and parried the thrust that followed. He then jumped back onto a handspring, deactivating his lightsaber before his hands touched the water the first time, and then when he springed up he ignited it and blocked a downward strike from Tenten's lightsaber. He looks at her and said, good, your form is getting better, now let's try your defense, and pushed her lightsaber away and came in a spinning slash toward her midsection that could have cut her in half if she had not intercepted it with her weapon. They tied up in a test of strength when Naruto ran his blade down hers until it was off, causing Tenten to overbalance, and he backslashed the blade away from her into the air and used the force to grab it and ignite the weapon, crossing both his and hers like a pair of scissors, and held it by her neck before deactivating them both. He sighed and said, that was good, but you let the sudden change in pressure be your downfall. Never match a person with all your strength who is stronger than you. It will cause you to overbalance. Other than that, your instincts are sharp as well as your skills from using a regular sword. Tenten bowed and said, thanks. Though I wish I had not been defeated so easily. They both turned up to look at Zabuza and Kakashi looking down at them clapping. Zabuza said, you both have skills, but I notice you both have flaws in your forms that I can help. Naruto said, what do you mean? Kakashi said, I decided to ask them to join Konoha. I can assure them safe passage since the Hokage owes me big time right now. Naruto and Tenten both snickered when they heard this, and Sasuke said, why do they get a special trainer? Kakashi sighed and said, I am going to have to spend some time with you teaching you how to use your bloodline now that it's awakened, so Ranger and Sakura will both have to start learning from scrolls that I will make for them while I get you familiar with it. Naruto nodded and Sakura said, that won't be necessary, Kakashi-sensei. I will watch you train Sasuke, so don't worry about me. Everyone looked at her and Tenten said, can I please? Naruto shook his hand and then 2 Senbon needles flew at Sakura and hit her on each of her, and she screamed. She became covered, but it was not blood. Instead, the 2 balloons she had in her wrapping popped and the water covered her dress. Almost everyone laughed at her predicament. The only one who did not laughing was Neji, who said, I already knew it when I saw her with my bloodline. Sakura crossed her arms and forgot the Senbons were still in her wrapping and wound up stabbing herself in the arms. At this everyone's sweat dropped and Zabuza asked, how did you know? Haku said, because of my bloodline I can detect all sources of water, and so when I saw her before we attacked I detected it then. Lee screamed and said, the beautiful Sakura Blossom was actually a guy. No. Sakura forgot all about the wounds on her arms as she let inner Sakura out and screamed, I am not a guy, and charged Lee, who was still weeping. Tenten took the opportunity and untied Sakura's laces with the force, and Naruto turned, sinking Tenten used the force. Sakura tripped on her laces and flew at Lee, who dodged out of the way thinking she was still a guy, and landed on Neji, who was on the ground in a meditative position. He looked up just in time for the two to meet lip to lip. Neji sighed and said, "I guess I was fated to marry you." That drew a collective, "Huh." Neji said, "A law in the branch family laws state that if someone of the opposite can get through their defense enough to kiss them, then they are both to be wed to balance out each other's weaknesses. Also, since you are a non-Hyuga, then you will have to quit being a ninja so the clan can protect you." Sakura paled and screamed, "No. I don't want to marry you, I want to marry Sasuke." "Kakashi-sensei, can he force me to do that?" Sasuke smirked and said, "He can. The laws of Konoha prohibit anyone from interfering with clan laws." Naruto said, "She is not even worried about giving up being a ninja." Tenten sighed and said, "I can't believe that happened like that." Naruto said, "What were you controlling anyways?" Tenten smiled and said, "Her laces." Naruto looked at Sakura's feet that were doing a tantum like a little 3-year-old who is not getting what he wants, and sweat drops. Tazuna walks up and said, "I appreciate the show you are doing for everyone, but you are actually stopping work." Guy said, "Sorry about that. Lee, let's use the power of youth to help them." And they both took off in blurs. 2 weeks later, both Team 7 and 9 were on their way back to Konoha. They had just left Wave Country a few hours ago by the Great Force Bridge. Sasuke's wounds had healed and everyone was happy to be heading home. Zabuza looked at everyone and said, "Hey, if you don't mind going a little out of the way, there is a hot spring gambling town about a mile east of here, and I need to pay off a debt there before we head to Konoha. If you want, we can all go there to rest before getting back." Everyone agreed, and when they got there, a large group of people were standing at the village's gates. Zabuza saw the man he owed money to and said, "Dwayne, what is going on here?" The man who Zabuza called over walked to them and said, "A blonde-haired woman went on a rampage a little while ago and destroyed half the town. She was with a black-haired woman and some old guy who had a scroll on his back screaming how she was going to kill her sensei." Kakashi said, "What exactly did they look like?" The man thought for a moment, and another man walked up and said, "One of them is the legendary sucker Tsunade. She was actually winning when she became enraged. The other was the author of Ika Ika Paradise Jiraiya, and the black-haired woman is Tsunade's assistant." Why? At the mention of the names Naruto, Tenten, and Kakashi all got interested, and Naruto said, "Which way were they heading?" The man said, "Konoha." Naruto bowed and said, "Thanks," before taking off with Tenten behind him. Everyone was confused except Kakashi, who said, "Guy, here's a challenge for you. If the entire group can make it back to Konoha before Tsunade gets there, I will give you credit for this one." Guy perked up and dropped his weights and said, "Lee, take them off and carry Haku. I shall carry the Sasuke and Sakura." Lee dropped his weights and both men blurred, leaving Zabuza, who had just finished paying off his debt, and Kakashi. Neji had already took off. Zabuza looked at Kakashi as they raced through the trees and said, "What's wrong?" Kakashi said, "If my guess is correct, then the Hokage is about to get his wiped," as they took off even faster. Back in Konoha, it was a peaceful day. The birds were chirping. The wind was blowing. Gambunta landing in the middle of the village with someone holding his giant sword in her hands. Just a normal day in Konoha. Wait a minute. Someone holding a 60-foot-tall sword in her hands, riding on a 200-foot-tall summon creature that lands in the middle of the village and is heading toward the Hokage's tower. Now that's something you don't see every day. As Gambunta lands outside the tower, the sword the woman is holding slices into the tower on the floor. The Hokage's office is on, and she runs down the length of the blade and enters the building, leaving a terrified white-haired man, a cowering black-haired woman, and an even more scarred Gambunta who had a black eye. He looks up at Jiraiya and said, "If you live through this, let me meet your grandson," before he disappeared in a puff of smoke. As the two other riders entered the tower, they could hear the sound of battle and screaming. Let's take a look inside the Hokage office. On second thought, this scene it's too violent for me to describe at this time. We shall check the aftermath in a little while. As Team 7 and 9 arrived at the gates of Konoha, they see a giant frog disappear and what appeared to be a huge sword sticking out of the Hokage's office disappear as well. Tenten asked, "What the hell?" Naruto shrugs his shoulders as Kakashi lands behind them and said, "What's wrong?" Naruto said, "When we got here, a huge frog disappeared and a sword was sticking out of the Hokage's tower and it disappeared also." Kakashi ignored the guards at the gate who were gawking and said, "Hurry," as he took off toward the tower with everyone following. Now it is a really screwed up sense where ABNU are too preoccupied to notice a missing nin from the bingo book running through Thier village with a 6-foot-tall sword on his back. As both teams made it outside the office, they see 22 ABNU on the ground with broke mask on, as well as several Chunin and Junin ninja with black eyes, broken bones, as well as several foreign objects sticking out of some of their butts. Kakashi paled as he recognizes the original 10,000 years of pain that he made the 1,000 years of death from. The group walks slowly to the door and everyone was wondering what to do. Just then both doors fell to the floor as the hinges broke from a punch they had earlier received. Everyone looked into the room to see a woman with her fist pulled back holding the Hokage by the neck and a white-haired man cowering behind a black-haired woman. Everyone in the office looked at the new arrival and the third, who had a black eye and several missing teeth and an arm that's not supposed to bend that way, said, "Oh Naruto, we were just talking about you," as he passes out. Tsunade sighs and drops him before looking closely at the group. She gasps when her eyes land on Naruto because his hood had fallen back running. She thought, "He looks just like my little brother." Naruto slowly walks in and takes a survey of the damage and said, "You must pack one hell of a punch. Now could you tell me who you are and why you attacked the old man?" Tsunade sat down on the desk that falls off its legs from damage on one side. She sighs and said, "My name is Tsunade and I was told by Sensei here you are my grandson." Naruto looked at the third and said, "He told me he did not know if you really were related to me without a blood test." Tsunade said, "Give me your hand." Naruto walked over and held out his hand and felt a stick faster than most could see, and then Tsunade's hand started to glow green and she looked up at him and said, "It's true." She then walked over and kicked the Hokage, sending him into the wall. Naruto turned to the other two occupants and said, "Who are you?" Tsunade said, "The black-haired woman is my apprentice Shizune and the old pervert there is kind of hard to explain." Jiraiya stood up and said, "I am the man who is loved in the north, south, east and west. The man who can make any woman blush and a baby cry. The author of Ika Ika Paradisen." Just then Naruto sent a lightning bolt at him, electrocuting him, and everyone's sweat dropped except Tsunade, who was laughing her off. Naruto stopped attacking and Jiraiya said, "What's wrong with you, Gaki? Is that any way to grate your grandfather?" Naruto stopped stalking forward and said, "Grandfather, I was told you were a pervert and mom asked me to electrocute you for peeping on her the first time I saw you so you would know I was her son." Kakashi took this moment to cough and said, "Everything's okay now. I will give the report to the Hokage when he wakes up. Sasuke, go to the hospital and get checked out. Sakura, go with Neji and find out what exactly is going on." Guy said, "That's very hip of you, my eternal rival. Come Lee, we have training to do." And they both left. Kakashi looked at everyone left and said, "I will come back later," and left in a swirl of leaves, taking Zabuza and Haku with him. Tsunade looked over at Tenten and said, "Are you going to leave also?" Naruto said, "Tenten is my apprentice and..." Tenten said, "Girlfriend, Tsunade-sama." Tsunade gave them a critical eye and said, "Aren't you both a little young to be dating?" Naruto said, "It's our choice. We have other things to discuss, more importantly about what to do now." Tsunade said, "I just find out that the son I thought died at birth was alive for most of my life and then died killing that evil Kyuubi and left a grandson I never knew about." Naruto looked around the room and said, "Perhaps we should go someplace more private to talk." The third, who was awake now, said, "Naruto, perhaps you should take them to a more private spot like your apartment." Naruto nodded and Tenten said, "What about the coming war?" That stopped everyone from moving and the third said, Perhaps I should come also so you can explain that to me. Jiraiya sighed and picked the third up and they all left by the new window the third had in the wall. When everyone got inside, Naruto and Tenten went to the kitchen to start making tea and Tenten said, "Go ahead. I will bring it out when ready." Naruto said, "Thanks," before going back out and joining the others. Shizune was healing the third because Tsunade was still too ticked to heal him. The third coughed and said, "Perhaps you should start with what wore Naruto." Naruto nodded and said, "When I returned to the planet I left my droid on my spaceship Pathfinder. I had him scanning for any ships entering or leaving the planet but ALKSO for any communications to or from off-planet. We had just arrived at Wave when C4 my droid picked up a ship leaving the planet. As you can guess, besides myself the only other person I am aware of that should come to this planet is Darth Chaos." The third nodded and Tsunade said, "What are you talking about, spaceships, droids, and who is this Darth Chaos you are talking about?" Naruto sighed and said, "Tell me how much you actually know about your grandfather and his brother Granny." Tsunade was mad because it made her feel old being called Granny, but that is what she was, so she let it go, for now. She looked at him and said, "I know them both for the first few years of my life until they both died." "Why?" Naruto said, "Do you know where they came from originally?" Tsunade said, "Not really. I know they brought the first people from Grass Country, but before that I don't know." "Why?" Naruto said, "From what I was told from my mother as well as a few other places I was able to find out that both the first and second were Jedis like myself and my parents." Tenten, who was setting down the tea, said, "I would believe that after what you did in Wave, controlling both the water and trees like that." This got everyone's attention and the Tsunade said, "We will discuss that later, but what were you saying?" Naruto said, "I know this is going to sound weird, but it's true. Your grandfather and his brother were both Jedi masters that fled to survive a war with the Sith to this planet." Tsunade said, "I find that hard to believe." Naruto said, "Would it help if you saw my spaceship?" The third said, "You would do that?" Naruto nodded and said, "Follow me." As he got up and left with everyone following him. It took them about an hour to get back to the cave where the Pathfinder was, and when everyone saw it they were in awe except Naruto. Naruto walked up and said, "C4 TNT. Stand down and open all access doors to the conference room." A few moments later a ram lowered and a green-looking droid walked down the ramp that looked surprisingly similar to Wing Zero Gundam with retractable wings. Everyone except Naruto was pointing a finger and Naruto walked by the droid who bowed and up the ramp. Not wanting to be left behind, the 5 people started to follow him. When they walked into a circular room with a white cone in the center and a circle table around it, he took a seat and said, "C4, get me some Corleone scotch." "Would anyone else like a drink?" Tenten asked. "Are we too young to drink?" Naruto said, "This stuff ain't too bad and I have had to spend more times in bars than I care to in the past couple of years. You learn to handle the stuff." Tsunade said, "What's the hardest stuff you have?" Naruto turned to the droid who was standing there and said, "We still have any of that crate dragon wine?" C4 said, "1 bottle, sir." Naruto said, "Get it for Granny here." The third said, "I will have some water." Jiraiya said, "I will have some of what Tsunade has." Shizune said, "Water please." Tenten said, "I have never drank before. What do you suggest?" Naruto thought for a moment and said, "Give her a Alderanian royal wine." The droid bowed and left. Naruto sighed and said, "So you believe me about the first and second being from another planet?" Tsunade said, "Yes. So why don't you continue your story?" Naruto said, "Basically you can drop the act about Kyuubi you said being killed by Dad. We all know he was not, though it won't be long before he is though." The third said, "What do you mean?" Naruto said, "Remember when I told you Kyuubi saved me from Darth Chaos? Well, I walked into a trap he had set up and would have died from the methane gas that I breathed in. When Dad sealed him into me, Kyuubi did not get his chakra regeneration ability, so the more he puts in my system the less he actually has. Add the damage the villagers did to me before I left as well as the minor healing ability, and you have a bone-dried Kyuubi who will die the next time I have to draw on his power. Jiraiya said, so you're the kid he sealed that beast into. I say good riddance. Naruto looked at Jiraiya harshly and said, Kyuubi was actually innocent until Darth Chaos used his powers on him and forced him to attack so he could kill mom and dad. Just then C4 came back in carrying the drinks and passed them to everyone. Tsunade said, is this the same guy you said ambushed you? Naruto said, yes, he is also the one who killed mom. Was responsible for dad's death. Along with countless others. The third said, what is this about a war? Naruto turned to C4 and said, did you record the transmission? C4 said, of course master. And keyed some stuff on a table and everyone heard the message. The third recognized Itachi's voice. The third said, well, we will have to prepare for the war as well as the visit. Tenten said, I hate to ask this now, but what do you have planned about Naruto getting to use his real name? I sort of called him Naruto on our mission to Wave when I thought he died after controlling the plants and water like he did. The third said, that's up to Jiraiya and Tsunade. Jiraiya said, what do you mean? The third said, the only way Naruto can claim his actual birth name is to either get married, achieve Chunin, or have you claim him publicly. Tsunade said, I have no problem claiming him, and I know the pervert over there won't disagree, cracking her knuckles. Jiraiya paled and said, no problem. Tenten smiled at this and said, good. Naruto-kun. I hated calling you Ranger. Tsunade took a gulp of her drink, not thinking much of it before she had to dive for Shizun's water right after. Naruto said, it has a kick, huh? Tsunade ran a medical jutsu on it and whistled before saying, this thing is 98% pure liquor. During the little floor show, Naruto caught sight of something and said, Granny, I was wondering, can I see that necklace you have? Tsunade looked down at it and seemed reluctant as she handed it to him, and he pulled his lightsaber out and sat it on the table before opening it and looking at the crystal of it and smirked and said, where did you get this? Tsunade said, it's my grandfather's. Why? Naruto handed both crystal to Tenten, who also pulled her lightsaber apart and compared the crystals before whistling and said, this one has even better power formation than either of ours. Naruto nodded and said, that's the crystal of a dual lightsaber. Tsunade said, what do you mean? Naruto said, do you mind if I borrow this a moment? Tsunade said, well, okay. After thinking a minute. Naruto said, Tenten, go ahead and put yours back together. I will be back in a moment. And he left the room down one of the side passages. Tenten used the force to put hers back together and activated it, making everyone gasp in awe at the weapon, and Tsunade whispered, Raijin. Naruto returned about 5 minutes later and said, this is what I was talking about, and activated a gold-cased lightsaber that had a green blade shoot out the end. Jiraiya said, I don't see any difference besides color between yours and hers. Naruto smiled and held the lightsaber in a different position before a second blade extended out the back of the handle and said, this is a dual lightsaber. Just then C4's eyes flashed red and his right arm changed shape and started walking toward the exit to the ship. Naruto caught this and said, I will handle it, as he walked toward the exit ramp and disappeared down it. Tenten said, what was that about? C4 said, an intruder just entered about a mile from here heading this way slowly. A few minutes Naruto returned and sighed as he sat down. The third said, what's going on? Naruto said, some idiot from Route was following the trail here trying to find out what's going on. I used a Jedi mind trick to make him think that our trail led back to the hospital. The third nodded and Naruto looked at the lightsaber and sighed before starting to take it apart and handed Tsunade the crystal back. Tsunade said, thanks, as she put the string back through it and put it around her neck. Naruto said, well, I think we should head back. C4, I have a mission for you. I want you to go and take the ship to the 10 most populated systems and stay in system long enough to get spotted and return in 3 months. If you need repairs, go to the Wookiee homeworld and look up Barardika and have him work on the ship as well as any maintenance you might need. If you are in a system and a Sith ship or a Republic military ship comes into system, leave. C4 said, "Do you need anything before I leave, sir?" Naruto thought for a moment and said, "No, just follow my orders." C4 just nodded and everyone started to get up as Naruto put his lightsaber back together and then sealed the parts to his dual lightsaber in a scroll. Everyone left the location of the Pathfinder and the third said, "So Tsunade, what do you plan to do?" Tsunade looked over at Naruto and said, "I am not leaving the only family I have left." The third said, "Is it possible I might be able to convince you to take my job?" Tsunade looked at him and said, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The third disappeared in a swirl of leaves when Tsunade drawed back her fist. Shizune said, "I am sorry to interrupt Tsunade, but what about your debts?" Jiraiya snickered at this and drew everyone attention. He said, "Tsunade-hime, have you made any new ones in the last 40 days?" Shizune said, "Just one to the Wakabu family in Grass Country." "Why?" Jiraiya said, "Then that's the only one she has left then." Tsunade stopped and said, "What do you mean, you old pervert?" Jiraiya said, "When I started looking for you after I was told about the Gaki here, I started to follow your trail and the only way I could get closer was to pay off all your debts, so you currently owe me," pulled out a black book and looked at it, 296 million. "Don't worry, I won't charge interest." Shizune sighed and said, "So why don't you tell us a little about yourself, Naruto and Tenten?" Tenten said, "Well, my family owns the Wolfclaw weapon shop. It's just me and Dad. Mom passed away giving birth to me. I am a member of Team 9, or Team Guy as most call it, with Rock Lee, the dead last of my year, and Neji Hyuga, the rookie of the year. I have the nickname the Weapon Mistress because I have 100% accuracy with weapon and I always carry around at least 3,000 weapons on me at all times." Everyone sweat drops looking at her. "I met Naruto here right after he came back from training and we started dating on the second day we knew each other. I have also been his apprentice since the first day." Shizune said, "What are your dreams and plans for the future?" Tenten said, "This may sound funny now, but I wanted to be a great female ninja like Tsunade-sama and continued to train in the Force." Tsunade nodded and said, "What about you, Naruto?" Naruto said, "I was trained from the age of 5 by my mother until 2 years ago when she was killed in the Force, and also what she knew about chakra. I know henge, replacement, Kujibunshin, tree climbing, water walking, a genjutsu that I always wear on my face, and I have been trying to master the Hiraishin no Jutsu. I also know how to use sealing scrolls, but I don't know anything about how to make them or what the seals actually mean." Jiraiya coughed and said, "Where did you get the info on that?" Tenten said, "My father was entrusted with the skulls for it and told to give it to Naruto when he returned." Jiraiya said, "What has Kakashi taught you?" Naruto said, "So far nothing. The only reason he is a sensei now is because the council is forcing him to because of the Uchiha." Tenten said, "Don't forget he said he would give you some scrolls since he found out you are to try and make it up for not being there." Naruto said, "I know, but I will believe it when I see it." Jiraiya said, "How would you like it if I taught you everything I taught your dad?" Naruto said, "I would like to, but I can't just abandon Tenten training also." Tsunade said, "Actually, I was thinking, Tenten, how would you like to train under me as well?" Tenten looked at Naruto and said, "I would like that, but don't you want to teach your grandson?" Tsunade said, "I will just teach his future wife instead." Tenten blushed and said, "Why does everyone say we are going to get married?" Shizune said, "You make too cute of a couple." Naruto said, "I don't think it's that far-fetched of an idea someday." Tenten stopped and said, "Are you sure about that?" Naruto said, "Only if it's with you forever." Tenten said, "I would like that." Tsunade said, "Great. Then it's settled. The pervert here will take care of teaching Naruto and I will take you on with help from Shizune here." Shizune said, "Don't I have an opinion?" Tsunade said, "Of course. Don't you want to help? Shizune said. Of course, I just would have liked to been asked first. Everyone laughed. As they reached an intersection, Naruto said, I guess this is where we part ways, as he looked at the adults. Tsunade said, why you say that? Naruto said, well, Tenten lives at her family shop and my apartment I am renting from the third is not big enough for everyone, so I figured you all had some place you would want to stay. Tsunade said, yes. Your family estate's near the Hokage monument. Go ahead and stay at your place tonight, but tomorrow we will move you in. Naruto smiled and said goodbye before walking Tenten home, kissing her goodnight as well before turning in. For the next month things have been pretty active for Naruto. First he moved into the Gordian Estates. It was named that after the two Hokages that guarded the village during its dark beginnings. Naruto had also started training with Jiraiya. He mastered the Rasengan in a little over a week with the help of Kujbunshin's. He also signed the Toad contract, and after being taught Leaf Balance and Kunia Balance, his chakra control increased to high Chunin level. He had also worked on Kenjutsu, after getting a regular ABNU sword from the Wolfclaw weapon shop, with Zabuza, who was made a special Junin. After learning how to summon, he had a great meeting with Gambunta. Flashback a week into training. Naruto, who had been spending all week working on chakra control exercise. Today Jiraiya had him sign the Toad contract and told him to put as much chakra as he could into it to see how big of a summon he could bring forth. Big mistake. Note to self, Naruto has more chakra than the Hokage and all the Sanins put together. Of course he is going to summon Gambunta on the first try. When Gambunta appeared, he took a look around and said, who the hell summoned me? Naruto jumped off his head and landed on his nose and said, I did. Why? Gambunta said, you used way too much chakra to call me here. Naruto said, what's the problem with that? Gambunta sweat drops and said, you must be the pervert's grandson. Naruto said, yes, the name's Naruto Kazama. Gambunta nodded and said, well, the problem is that thanks to you using so much chakra I can't leave for a week now, and that scary woman could actually do what she threatened. Naruto, who was confused, said, what scary woman and what threat? Gambunta said, your grandmother. She forced the pervert to summon me and held me hostage with my own blade. She said if I did not get her to this village fast, she would turn me into a frog-skinned wallet. Naruto sweat dropped and said, could you not just leave? Gambunta said, not when she had my blade at my throat. I either have to run out of chakra or make a seal, and when I am too scared to make the seal I could not leave. Naruto said, so what do we do now? Gambunta said, you have any chakra left? Naruto said, yeah, I did not use much really. Gambunta sweat dropped and said, fine, let's work on Kaden. Gamayu Enden, fire release, Toad oil flame bullet. Do you know the hand signs? Naruto nods no, and Gambunta starts teaching him it. By the end of the second day they had it down, and Naruto had Gambunta go look around this world and enjoy his time here. End flashback. Sakura was removed from Team 7 because of the Hyuga laws, much to Naruto's great relief, and was replaced with Haku, who, even though is skilled enough for Chunin, the Hokage wanted her to work her way up and gain the Leaf's trust. Kakashi had actually kept his word and started giving Naruto scrolls to start learning. Currently Naruto had learned Kaden, Hosenka no Jutsu, Fire Style, Art of the Phoenix Flower, the Touch Me Not Kaden, Karyu Enden Fire Release, Fire Dragon Flame Bullet Kaden, Gokaku no Jutsu, Fire Release, Great Fireball Technique, and Chidori. From Jiraiya he learned Kaden, Gamayu Enden Fire Release, Toad Oil Flame Bullet Cage Shuriken no Jutsu, Shadow Shuriken Technique, Hari Jizo, Spiked Jizo Doden, Yomi Numa Earth Release, Swamp of the Underworld Bunshin Debakua Clone Great Explosion, and Cage Kunia no Jutsu, Shadow Kunia Technique, as well as the Hummingbird Tiahutsu style that Arashi created. It works on destroying joints and bones with high-speed power punches. Jiraiya also had Naruto created 20 clones that would work on different books explaining the basics of sealing. Right now Naruto can make some mid-Chunin level seal and should be advancing soon. Naruto was also introduced to the world of weight training, or more precisely gravity weights. When Naruto told Jiraiya about other planets and some having different weather and gravities, he decided Naruto needed a way to work on speed and have a stamina better. Currently at 10 times normal gravity. Naruto was amazed about the secret training skill of Kage Bunshins. Tenten had also improved. Tsunade really did mean it when she was making her an apprentice. At first she made Jiraiya teach her Kage Bunshin also so that she could make 2 clones and have them read while she taught her medical Tiahutsu. Tenten was sorely lacking in this area. Tsunade had also taught her chakra control that medics use, which should have started with a simple leaf balancing on her hands, but Tsunade did it a little different. Instead of a leaf on her hands, Tsunade made Tenten hover above a hospital bed made out of nails, on each side of her body. Tenten learned this quickly. She was also given gravity weights like Tsunade had on in secret. The only ones who knew she had them on was Shizunen herself. The seals for it were hidden on her stomach. Currently she was a 3 times normal gravity. Now as for a few other things that have happened. Naruto's real name was released in a council meeting and things were not pretty. Flashback 2 days after leaving the Pathfinder. The third called a meeting of all council members, and when everyone arrived he said, "I wish to thank you all for coming so soon. The reason I called you was a member of our council has returned from several years of traveling abroad and she is going to take her family seat now." Danzo said, "Is that all you called us for, you old idiot? You could have passed a memo to all of us instead of wasting our time." The third said, "Actually I could not because of certain rules. The seat she will be taking over was filled by a temporary member and now that member has to be dismissed from the council." Danzo said, "And who is this unfortunate person?" he said with a smile. The third said, "Actually it's you, Danzo." Danzo's smile dropped and said, "That's not possible. I was given the posting for the founders of Konoha, and since Tsunade is the only member of that family left and she hates this village, I believe you are mistaken." The third said, "Let her in." And an ABNU opened the door to the council chamber and Tsunade walked in, causing several people to be unnerved by this because Danzo was one of the major powers Aegeans, the Hokage on the council, and many civilian members would have been out long before this had it not been for him. Danzo, not giving up without a fight, said, "You seem to have forgotten something about that particular law, Saratobi. For it to work, the person either has to be of childbearing age or has an heir to his or her family. Tsunade is past her childbearing years and never had a child, so it can't be enforced." Tsunade said, "For a person who has his own little army, you don't keep very good records. I did have a son and you all knew him even though he had a different name for his safety." Danzo paled at the possibility of this and then said, "Then who might this person be?" The third said, "Her son was Arashi Kazama." Several members gasped at this, thinking that if it was true it would explain how he was so strong. Danzo said, "But as we all know, Arashi did not have a child, so you lose," as he sat down with a big smile and his arm crossed. Tsunade snickered and said, "Actually you info sucked there also. My son did have a child and in less than 1 year will be stronger than every person in this room. In fact, this very council has tried to kill him in the past." Hiyoshi said, "That is a lie. No one on this council has ever tried to kill a child before." The third said, "Actually it has tried to kill him 616 times by the last record before he left to begin his training with his mother in her family special abilities." Inoichi said, "I am curious about something before we go any further into these allegations. What did you mean in less than a year he will be stronger than everyone here?" Tsunade said, "Well, let's do a little background on him, shall we? He has recently learned the secret to my grandfather's and his brother's special abilities to control both plants and water. He has almost completely mastered Hiraishin no Jutsu. He is currently training under his grandfather Jiraiya of the Sanins on the Rasengan. He has nearly mastered all of his mother's special abilities, which can compare to the damage of Hiraishin, and in less than 1 year something his father did to him the day he was born will be finished. Here is the kicker that you are all going to love. When that timeline is up, the power that was sealed into him the day he was born will be completely under his control. Can any of you guess what that power was? I will give you a hint. It attacked our village almost 13 years ago. Shikamaru's dad was the first to piece it together and with wide eyes said, so we have a person who has not only two potential bloodline, but also has mastered a jutsu that can decimate over 1,000 ninja in less than 5 minutes as well as other skills that rival that power and has the full power of the Kyuubi no Kitsune under his control. To put it simple to those who are thinking of attacking him. If you tick him off I have 2 words for you. Were. Danzo said, but he is not a ninja of our village and with all those skills must be put to death. The third chuckled and said, he has been a ninja of this village for nearly 3 months. In fact he has been under your nose the whole time and none of you realized it. Hiyoshi thought for a moment and said, he's the boy who wears the robe on Kakashi team, isn't he? The third said, yeep. Well Danzo I believe that means you are relieved from your council seat and also I want you to know that I have decided to disband Root. I have received the last report of your men harassing civilians and lower level ninja. If I catch you doing anything that I deem questionable I will have you executed for treason. Danzo bowed his head as he left the room and Saratoba's 2 teammates looked at him and said, you knew all of this back then and that is why you fought to save Uzumaki so bad. Right. Why did you not tell us? The third said, if it became public info before he could defend himself we would have been at war with Iwa Aegean. I am stating this now. Including everyone in this room only 50 people in this village know he is here. If he is harassed, have services stopped, prices increased like before, attacked, or any of his friend or companions are treated unfairly not only will the ones who did it be executed but the person who told will be also along with all of their property seized. Tsunade said, actually since my family never publicly announced our last name and the third named Arashi Kazama, Naruto's last name is Kazama. Now sensei I think you should tell them about Orochimaru. The third nodded and said, this is the biggest secret we have ever had I am about to reveal so listen carefully. We recently got word from a spy who was on a separate mission from this overheard Uchiha Itachi and his partner will be coming to Konoha after the Chunin exams because we are supposed to be weak afterwards. And civilian member said, why are we supposed to be weak then? The third said, Orochimaru is planning on attacking the Leaf Village at some point during the Chunin exams with an army. Gasps were heard all over the 36 council members' seats. The third sighed and said, I have decided that since I know I will be one of his targets, that if I should die I will have Tsunade act as Hokage until she finds a suitable replacement also. With her skills she can help the Leaf recover from the damage we will undoubtedly receive. One of the civilian council members who had backing of Danzo said, why not nominate Danzo? He is qualified. Saratoba's 2 teammates said, he has the skills to run the military side but the civilian economy would be ruined. The root program that he was in charge of was an actual Hokage training program and he failed miserably. He abused his power, did not care about the well-being of his own men and was financially ruined. Of the 110 root members he has only 20 or 30 could be placed as a regular ninja or ABNU now because the others were either improperly trained or are too corrupted to be saved without massive retraining. Tsunade said, I actually turned the position down at first but I have already talked it over with the third and if I have to take over I will be using the time of repair to upgrade not only the medical program and personal but also the general academy and ninja skills to make us stronger than ever. Clapping could be heard from over half the members. All the clan heads and the ones who knew they would soon be gone. Flashback end. So far the threat has held and no one has bothered Naruto, well almost, but that is for another reason. Flashback. Naruto walked into the Wolfclaw weapon shop to meet Tenten and Dustin was at the counter and smiled when he saw Naruto and said, boy, before you leave today I want to talk to you. Naruto nodded as Tenten walked in from the back and Dustin said, Tenten, run the store for a few minutes. I want to talk to Naruto here a minute. Tenten nodded and went to the cash register. Naruto walked to the back with Dustin. Dustin said, I know you and my daughter have been spending a lot of time together and I have been okay with it with you showing affection, kissing, but it seems you both are getting closer so I want to know exactly what your intentions for her are. Naruto said, I care for her greatly and I would like to marry her someday. Dustin, who was holding a kunai in his hand examining it for inventory, turned and tossed it at Naruto and it landed directly in front of his crotch, making his eyes as big as a silver dollar. Naruto looked at him and he said, just make sure you don't hurt her. You know how good she is with weapons and you should realize I taught her everything she knows and I make my own weapon and I don't have to worry about anyone finding your body because my furnace that I make weapons with is hot enough to destroy all traces of your body. Naruto just nodded and got up to leave with Tenten. When they both made it outside, Naruto took a look back inside the store and saw Dustin smile at him twirling a kunai, and Naruto turned to Tenten and said, promise me, if I do something idiotic or that hurts you or makes you mad, talk to me about it and let me make it up to you. Tenten looked at Naruto and then at her dad and said, what happened in there with dad? Naruto said, he just asked me to make sure you're happy. Tenten said, how many weapons did he use? Naruto said, just one. Tenten started to laugh and said, don't worry. He is a teddy bear. Naruto said, yes, but a bear nonetheless. End flashback. With Team 7, Kakashi had been having them do D-rank missions every other day. Tuesday and Thursday he had personal training. Haku was training with Zabuza and also been learning some new medical skills from Shizune. Naruto with Jiraiya. Kakashi was with Sasuke but was instead of teaching him a lot of jutsu he was making him work on mastering them. So far he has only learned 2 new jutsu. It did not help. Sasuke tried to kill his godson Aegeon. Flashback. Today was the most feared D-rank mission in existence. Catching the Firelord's cat Tora. Sasuke was the self-nominated leader of a group of ninja who don't listen to him. Since Naruto saved her adopted father and helped them realize it, Haku has become a great friend and teammate. Sasuke over the radio said, do you see the target, Dobi? Naruto sighed and said, I see the target. Sasuke said, what is its location? Haku said, look behind you. Sasuke turned and saw Tora sitting behind Sasuke with a smirk on its face. Sasuke reached for it and was about to grab her collar when Tora jumped up and started clawing Sasuke in the face. Sasuke became pissed and with his Sharingan activated started making hand seals for Kaden. Hosenka no Jutsu Fire Style, Art of the Phoenix Flower, the Touch Me Not at Tora. Naruto quickly used a nearby stream to block the fire and Haku used her bloodline to turn the water into a wall of ice. Naruto said, what the hell do you think you are doing trying to kill the target? Sasuke turned to Naruto and did the seals for Kaden. Hosenka no Jutsu, Fire Style, Art of the Phoenix Flower, the Touch Me Not again and shot it at Naruto. Naruto jumped out of the way and when he landed a wall of earth came up in front of Naruto. Sasuke and Naruto both looked around for the source of it when Sasuke felt a pair of hands grab his feet and pull him into the ground. Just then Kakashi walked up to the head and said, Sasuke, I am disappointed in you. Haku, since you captured the cat and worked with Naruto to save the cat, you both will be getting paid for this mission. However, Sasuke, you won't be paid and you will also be punished. Sasuke smirked and said, you don't have the balls to punish me. Kakashi said, really, and went through some hand seals cutting his hand on attack on his vest and said, Kuchio's no jutsu summoning technique, and a 4-foot-tall black pitbull appeared in a puff of smoke. Kakashi said, see his head. The dog nodded and Kakashi said, that's your fire hydrant. The dog smirked and walked over to Sasuke and raised his leg and started pissing all over Sasuke's face. Too bad Sasuke forgot to turn off his bloodline, so it was forever etched into his mind. Flashback end. Today Naruto was in the Hokage's office waiting for the third to say why he called him here. The third looked at Naruto and said, Naruto, I called you here today for a personal mission. Naruto looked at the third and said, what is it you need? The third said, my grandson Konohamaru is an academy student and he wants to be Hokage one day. The thing is, I am worried about him. I have had him training under a private tutor for over a year now, but he neither respects the man who is his teacher or advancing very far. Naruto said, exactly what is it you need me for, old man? The third said, He needs a role model that he can work toward being like, and I think you would be a good one. Especially with what is going to start this week. Naruto said, I will tell you what. Let me meet him, and once I see him and talk to him I will let you know, okay? The third said, that's fine. He should be over by the academy playing with his two friends. Naruto nodded and left the Hokage's office. It took him about 5 minutes to get to the area, but when he got there he heard someone screaming for help. When Naruto arrived where the person needed help, he saw two little kids on the ground crying and a third being held by the neck by a boy with makeup and dressed in black. Naruto jumped down and looked at their height and saw that they were from another village and said, let him go. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at the newcomer. Naruto, who was dressed in his normal Jedi robe, had his hood up covering the top half of his face and had his arms concealed inside his sleeves. The boy in makeup said, what makes you think I will listen to you? Just then Naruto heard his first friend's voice, Kit, I don't know about these two in front of you, but there is another in the tree to your right and he has the guardian of the sand inside him. Shukaku, the sand raccoon demon. Be careful. Naruto gave a mental nod and reached his hand out and his lightsaber flew to his hand and he injured it and said, Shukaku, these two with you. 3 set of eyes widened at that. The boy in makeup, the tall blonde girl behind him and the boy hidden in the tree. Just then a swirl of sand appeared in between Naruto and the boy in makeup and a boy appeared and said, who are you? Naruto said, someone like you, raccoon. Now tell me why you are harassing Leaf citizens. The boy who had rings under his eyes said, we are here for the Chunin exams and this is my idiotic brother Kankuro and my sister Tamari. Naruto nodded and said, Naruto. I will see you during the exams, raccoon. Gaara nodded and said, I will kill you. As he left with his brother and sister in a swirl of sand. Naruto sighed and then felt someone touch his hand and looked down and saw the kid he saved standing there and said, that was cool, boss. My name is Konohamaru and this is Uden and Moeji. Naruto nodded and said, it's nice to meet you all. So tell me why they were picking on you. Konohamaru said, we ran from a pink-haired banshee who was dressed like she was going to a funeral who was being led around by a hyuga. I accidentally bumped into her and said something about her forehead being even bigger than a hyuga's eyes and she chased after us. We lost her but bumped into those guys. Naruto smiled knowing he met Sakura and said, how would you three like to learn something? All 3 kids' eyes lit up and said, really? Naruto nodded and said, follow me. And he led them toward a training ground. When they arrived, Naruto turned to the 3 and said, you all want to be ninja, right? The 3 kids nodded and Naruto said, why? Moeji said, I want to show my family you can still use our family jutsu without eating all the time. Uden said, I like coming up with plans to help my friends stay out of trouble and outsmart people who only are nice to us because Konohamaru is the Hokage grandson and want to use him to get on the Hokage's good side. Konohamaru said, I want people to respect me for me and not for being the honorable grandson. Naruto nodded and said, you each have unique ideas and I like them all, so I will teach you water walking. When you have learned that and have mastered it to a point I feel you are ready, I will teach you a jutsu that will cut training time in at least half. All 3 kids were excited as Naruto started teaching them. The rest of the week went by with Naruto and Tenten either getting ready for the exams or being friends with the Konohamaru Corp, or as Tenten called them, little knights, since they all got cloaks made like hers and Naruto. Finally, the day that Naruto has been preparing for has arrived. The Chunin exams start today. He had just finished getting dressed and went downstairs and was greeted by both Jiraiya and Tsunade waiting for him. Naruto said, morning, what's going on? Tsunade said, me and your grandfather have been talking and we have decided that since you are representing our family you should have this. As she handed him a scroll. Naruto unsealed it and gasped at what was inside it. It was a white cloak with red and blue flames going across the bottom and the sleeves. It also had the Konoha leaf symbol and a lightsaber crossing another lightsaber above the leaf symbol and a picture of Gambunta above the lightsabers on the back, and also inside was the necklace. Tsunade had gave him her grandfather's necklace. Also there was a gold ring. Naruto turned to them and said, I don't understand. Jiraiya said, that cloak is just like your father's except his only had red flames. Yours has blue flames in it as well as a hood to hide your head since you like to do that. This family has done everything it could to protect and have come to be known as a sort of guardian of this village. The lightsabers are to show that the heir is also a Jedi. I remember Arashi saying the Force is strong in his family and I did not know what he meant at the time but I do now. He was talking about his past and future so I believe that the Force will also be strong in your children and they will become Jedi also. As for the frogs it seems that every male of the Kazama clan has had the toad summoned so I talked it over with Gambunta after you left him here for a week and he has agreed to make the toad contract not only a Konoha summon but a Kazama summon as well. Tsunade said, the necklace I am giving you because I have been a fool for years believing that that necklace only could destroy since everyone except me who wore it died. I see now that it is not a necklace of death but one of hope. I want you to keep it as a symbol of hope for our family and for the hope of this village and people everywhere. Also, don't be surprised by Tenten's new look. The slugs have also agreed to the same thing. Quote, Naruto took of his traditional Jedi robes and slipped on his new one. He then went and put the necklace around his neck and sealed the robe he had back into the now empty scroll. He then took the ring and looked at it with a raised eyebrow and Tsunade said, that is your wedding ring showing that you are engaged. Tenten also has one since you did sort of ask her to marry you. Naruto paled and said, Dustin is going to kill me. Jiraiya said, nonsense, who do you think made the rings? He slipped it on his ring finger and sighed. After Naruto was told good luck he used the newest jutsu Jiraiya taught him to travel. He used the leaf shushin to appear outside of the academy and saw Sasuke who had a black eye and Haku standing there waiting for him. He walked up and said, do I want to know? Haku said, he called me useless and Lee Kun punched him in the face. Naruto raised an eyebrow and said, since when did it become Lee Kun? Haku blushed and said, he asked me out last night. I agreed and we decided to date each other. Naruto smiled and said, I am happy for you. Sasuke just hummed before he said, let's go and don't hold me back. Haku said, water please. Naruto said, sorry, have to wait. When they walked up the stairs Naruto said, what floor were we supposed to test on? Haku said, room 301 on the third floor. When they made it to the second floor they saw a large group blocking room 201 because it had a genjutsu on the door. Naruto looked around and saw a genin punched Lee in the face. Naruto had to hold Haku back from freezing the poor bastard to death. Just then Sasuke said, weakling, release the genjutsu and let us pass. We are trying to get to the third floor. Several people started murmuring and Naruto brought his hand up and the firehouse on the wall blew off and the water shot out of it directly hitting Sasuke soaking him to the bone. Haku also added to it by making ice crystals form in it for earlier. Naruto sighed as Sasuke chatted his teeth and tried to push through the crowd that had formed heading to the real test room. He then felt a pair of arms come around him and give him a hug from behind. When he was released he turned and stared at Tenten in her new robe she had on. Hers was just like his but instead of white it was green and instead of a frog it had a slug. He also noticed the solid gold ring she had on her finger also. Naruto said, you look as lovely as ever Tenheim. Tenten blushed and said, as do you Naru-kun. Shall we? Motioning to the stairs. Naruto nodded and started heading up the stairs with Sasuke still soaked leaving footprints all the way down the hall. As they were walking Naruto turned to Neji and said, so how's the fiancé? Neji Veen popped out and said, I want to juke in her vocal cords. She acts like she is getting ready for a funeral instead of getting married in a year. I wish she was like your fiancé. With a smirk. This stopped everyone who turned to Naruto and Tenten and Haku said, so how long have you been engaged? Naruto said, well, Tenten said, he asked me when we got back from Wave. We just got the actual rings this week. Lee started his flames of youth speech and Naruto sighed as they continued to the test room. Before they entered, Naruto turned to Neji and said, "You are not going to make it personal if you fight Hinata, are you, Neji?" Neji sighed and said, "I already told you I want since you got that scroll of my father's for me that told the truth." Naruto said, "Yes. Konohamaru discovered it when he went to play with Hanabi, and since he met you thought you should get it." Neji said, "I still don't know how he got it without anyone seeing it." Naruto shrugged his shoulders and said, "The boy when he wants to can literally become invisible better than anyone I ever saw." Just then Kakashi appeared and looked at the two teams and stopped on Sasuke and said, "Dog piss." Haku had to control herself from laughing and Naruto said, "Fire hose." Kakashi sighed and said, "Flared your chakra and it will dry." Sasuke did and was dried after about 4 minutes of it, and Kakashi said, "Good luck and don't do anything I would not do." Naruto said, "What want you do?" as they entered the room. When they got there they saw nearly 300 people from different villages. As they were looking around the room, Naruto tensed when he felt something. He turned to Tenten and she nodded her head. They both looked around the room not seeing the source of it, but someone here could use the force beside them. Just then a blonde blur was seen with a shout of, "Sasuke-kun. Where have you been? Where's Forehead Girl and have you missed me?" Sasuke said, "Get off me, Ino." Just then Naruto felt another flare in the force and looked over and saw a man in a black cloak wearing a headband with what looked like a hand and flames behind it. A silver hair boy with glasses walked over and said, "Settle down. You're making the leaf look bad." Ino said, "Who are you?" The boy said, "My name is Kabuto and you are all rookies at this." Kiba, who walked over, said, "So how many times have you taken this test?" Kabuto said, "7th, and I have gathered a lot of info on almost everyone here." Sasuke said, "Can you give me information on him?" pointing to Naruto. Kabuto went into his deca and pulled out a card and said, "Naruto Kazama aka Naruto Uzumaki aka Ranger. Born October 10th. His father was the Yondaime Hokage and his mother is an unknown. Grandparents are Jiraiya and Tsunade of the Sannin. He disappeared at the age of 5 and returned this year and was made a genin for Team 7. Teammates are Sasuke Uchiha and was Sakura but was replaced by Haku. All information on his skills are classified as village secret." Naruto said, "You have any info on him?" pointing to the guy in the cloak. Kabuto said, "Yeah, his name is Darth Beslan and is from the new hidden village of Sith. The actual location of the village is a mystery and he is taking this test as a solo member. All other info on him is unknown." Naruto said, "You gave more than you know," with his eyes narrowed at the guy in the cloak. Tenten looked at him also and said, "What do you want to do?" Naruto said, "Avoid him if you can. If not, throw this on the ground aft, putting chakra into it," handing her a 3-prong kunai, causing Kabuto to gasp. Kiba said, "What's wrong with you? You act like you just seen a ghost." Kabuto said, "That kunai is one of the Hiraishin kunais. It was what made the Yondaime feared by Aiwa. It gives the user the ability to travel at the speed of light to the location of the kunai. There was a legend saying the only thing faster than the speed of light was the speed of sound. We may find out since the newly formed and still weak Sound Village is also here." The 3 members of the Sound Village moved to attack Kabuto, but when the Senbons went for him, Naruto sliced them in half with his lightsaber and Tenten held hers at the neck of the one with a mask on. Multiple puffs of smoke appeared and an instructor said, "What is going on here?" Naruto said, "Just defending a leaf nin before the exam started." The scared man said, "My name is Ibiki and I am your instructor. Everyone draw a number and take a seat and we shall begin the paper test." When everyone got seated and Ibiki explained the rules, everyone started. Tenten used the force to move mirrors on the roof for her and Lee to use. Sasuke used the Sharingan. Ino used her jutsu on a Hinata after she quit writing. Neji and Hinata had both used their bloodlines. Just then a mist ninja started screaming, holding his head. Before his eyes rolled back and he died. Almost everyone was freaked out by this, not knowing what happened. Naruto had figured it out, having seen it done before, and Tenten had a guess. Naruto sighed, trying to figure out the answers. When a piece of chalk rose wrote the answers on the board, Naruto turned to Tenten and she shook her head no, and they both looked back to where Darth Veslan was sitting and saw him smirk. When the last answer finished, a message appeared and said, "Take what you can get, Jedi scum. When we face each other, my master told me to kill you. To think I would find too. He will be most pleased." Ibiki, having enough of this, said, "Okay, who's the wise guy pulling this?" Nobody said anything because most were copying the answer. Naruto started writing on his test also. After the last question, a woman barely dressed came busting through the window and said, "My name is Anko. Follow me for the second part." As she got up to leave. When Ibiki started getting papers, he stopped at Naruto's and said, "No time to explain. Tell the Hokage a Sith is in the village and knows about me and my apprentice. Prepare. He will know what I am talking about." Ibiki motioned for one of the chunins that helped weed people out to finish getting the test while he went to the Hokage. Naruto walked with Tenten beside him as they went to training area 44. Naruto turned to her and said, "Be careful." Tenten nodded, knowing this is not a simple test any longer. Anko went on to explain the rules and threw a kunai at Naruto, who was so focused on the Sith that he acted on instincts, grabbed the kunai, twirled it before he thrust it where Anko appeared with a second kunai, making several teams forfeit. Team 7 was given a heaven scroll and entered through gate 11. They traveled toward the tower for an hour when Sasuke said, "Okay, listen up. I think we should run around and intercept any team we could before they reach the tower." Naruto said, "We need to get to the tower fast and wait for them there." Sasuke said, "What do you know?" He was interrupted by a blast of wind that all three of them avoided because of Haku being behind a tree, Sasuke using chakra to stay put, and Naruto throwing a Hiraishin kunai in the ground, flashing back to it when the attack ended. Laughter could be heard as a man appeared in a grass nin outfit appears and said, "I must say I am impressed by all three of you getting out of that attack," as he released a massive amount of ki. Unfortunately, the only one affected was Sasuke. Naruto was immune from feeling Darth Koa's and Kyuubi's. Haku felt it but shrugged it off because it was not much more than Zabuza's. The grass nin was surprised by this because he thought they were all trapped and threw 3 kunais at them, but all 3 were cut to pieces by a now active lightsaber. The grass nin pulled his face back and said, "I am Orochimaru. I would make you my vessel as well if it was not for your situation. It's a pity you already have the Kyuubi in you. Oh well." And 6 mudclones rose out of the ground and attacked Naruto and Haku while the real Orochimaru fought Sasuke. Naruto is making quick work of the clones with his lightsaber. Naruto looked over at Haku and saw she was having trouble, so he quickly brought water to the surface from an underwater spring. When Naruto destroyed the 4th clone, he had to jump back as a lightning bolt hit the ground where he was. He looked up and saw the Sith standing on a tree limb with a red dual lightsaber. Naruto turned and quickly slashed a mudclone that was sneaking up on him, destroying it, seeing the last one Haku had just finished. Naruto looked up at the Sith and heard a scene behind him as Orochimaru bites Sasuke on the neck. Naruto said, "Haku, help Sasuke. This is my fight." Haku nodded and went to help Sasuke, who was passed out, and Orochimaru leaving in the trees. Naruto said, "Shall we?" Veslan said, "I remember you now, Jedi. You ran away screaming for your mommy when we attacked that Jedi enclave." Naruto started to become mad at him when he heard Kyuubi say stay calm. Just then the Sith jumps down and starts attacking Naruto. Naruto did not have time to react properly because the Sith's lightsaber would rebound, trying to take him out with the reverse blade. Naruto jumps back and makes 20 kajbunshians that form a circle around the Sith. Veslan sticks out his hand and shoots lightning at th clones, destroying them, and looks around, not seeing Naruto. Just then a group of kunais land around the clearing from above. Veslan said, "Do you think this simple trick can be used against me?" And he used the force to lift the kunais up and fly off away from him. Naruto tries using the force to use tree roots to bind Veslan, but he cuts them away with his lightsaber. Naruto then brings more water out of the ground, covering everything in about a foot of water within 100 yards of where Veslan was standing. Veslan said, "What are you planning now, Jedi?" As he jumps into the air and slice the tree branch Naruto was standing on, making it and him both fall. Naruto hits the water and looks up, noticing Veslan launching lightning at him. Naruto quickly does the same thing and both lightning attacks hit and lock into a power struggle. As it appears they are evenly matched, Naruto put through his lightsaber a watt to be caught by a clone who he had created and hid when Veslan was throwing the Hiraishin Kuniyas away from the area. Naruto started forming a Rasengan in his now free hand and said, "Now." The clone jumped at Veslan, who brought his own lightsaber up and blocked the lightsaber and then destroyed the clone and lightsaber, still sending lightning at Naruto with his other hand. Naruto smirked and Hiraishin away to one of the Kuniya Veslan had thrown away. Veslan stopped his attack and looked around when Somethin landed on his head. He grabbed it and it was an orange toad that said, "Yo. This is for you." Pulling out a Hiraishin Kuniya from his vest, when suddenly a yellow flash appeared and a shout of Rasengan was heard when he felt intense pain fill his chest, causing him to drop his lightsaber that was caught in Naruto's free hand and activating it and slashing Veslan from neck to hip. Naruto sighed and said, "Thanks, Gamataki." The frog said, "No prob," before he left in a puff of smoke. Naruto reached down and grabbed what was left of his own lightsaber before putting them the Siths and his remains away. He checked Veslan and found the scroll they needed and went over to Haku, who had Sasuke on her back, and said, "Come on. We can get him checked out at the tower," as they took off for the tower. When they got there, it had been 10 hours since the test started. The only other teams to be there already was the team from Suna and Team 8. An hour later, Team 9 made it. Tenten ran up to Naruto and hugged him and saw the tired look on his face and said, "Is everything okay?" Naruto sighed and said, "I started to let my anger get to me because of that Sith. He was there when my mother died and he bragged about it." Tenten said, "I am sorry. What happened?" Naruto said, "I was able to kill him, but it was close," pulling out the pieces of his old lightsaber. Tenten looked at it and said, "Can anything be saved from it?" Naruto shook his head and said, "No. I got his lightsaber, but I don't want to use it if I can keep from it." Tenten asked why. Naruto said as he pulled it out and activated it, "The Sith don't get natural crystals for their lightsabers. They forge them themselves and use their hate to make it and taint the crystal. Tsunade gave me hers before the test, but I don't have the parts to change it out now." Tenten nodded and said, "Well, maybe you will get lucky and not have to use it." Time passed and the day of the exams arrived. Naruto was standing with the other teams that passed and were told about having to have a prelim matchup. I won't go into much detail on some matches because they are just like in the show. Sasuke, Shikamaru, Shino, Dosu, Kankuro, Gaara and Neji, who placed a death shot at Hinata's heart but with no chakra, making her forfeit the match. All won their matches. Tenten vs Tamari. The match started off with Tenten trying her thrown weapons and Tamari blowing them away with her fan, and it followed the show up till the point where Tenten was falling toward the now closed fan of Tamari. As Tenten was falling, she smirked and turned herself around and ignited her lightsaber, slashing through Tamari's fan. Tamari fell backwards, letting go of her fan, not able to believe that her metal fan could be destroyed so easily. Tamari said, "Since we are both good with weapons, how about a Taijutsu match to decide it all?" Tenten deactivated her lightsaber, putting it in her cloak, and said, "Sure," before pulling out a pair of black gloves. They both got into a taijutsu stance that almost no one had ever seen before. The third, who looked down, paled as he recognized Tenten's. Tamari charged at Tenten, who caught her fist. Tamare went for a leg sweep that was jumped up into the air. Kurenai whistled and said, "Guy, how did you teach her to jump like that?" Guy said, "I did not." Kurenai looked back as Tenten grabbed one of her legs, holding it to her forehead, and released it right in front of Tamari. The result was spectacular. A 20-foot wide crater formed, making everyone pale. Tamari, seeing this, immediately surrendered. Naruto vs. Kiba. Kiba jumped over the rail with his dog and said, "We got an easy match, boy." Naruto leaped Shushine to the arena, making several people raise an eyebrow. The match started and Kiba and Akamaru transformed into beast clones. They then used Gatsuga to attack Naruto, who simply looked bored, letting the hit connect before he went up in a puff of smoke. Kiba started looking around when suddenly the arena was filled with water waist deep coming out of the crater Tenten had made. Kiba, who was in the water, started screaming, "Where are you, you coward? Show yourself." A voice from above everyone said, "You have until I count to 10 to surrender or I will electrocute you till you pass out." Kiba said, "What makes you think I will sit here in the water and let you do that to me?" Naruto smirked and said, "This." 1. Several tree roots busted through the ground and wrapped around Kiba. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The ref said, "Enough. Winner Naruto." Naruto, who made the water recede and the tree roots go back into the ground, landed beside Kiba, who said, "I bet you don't know any Raiden Jutsu." Naruto said, "You're right. I don't know Raiden, just you." Kiba screamed, "You bluff the examiner." Naruto said, "No, this is not a jutsu," and shot a lightning bolt at the electric board, blowing it up since there was only one match left. Ino walked down the stairs with Haku and faced off, and Ino said, "You might as well give up. I will win because I was the best in the academy next to Sakura." Haku said, "Then this match is already over with me winning." The examiner began the match and ended it 2 seconds later. It only took Haku that long to pull a Senbon needle out and pierced Ino in the neck at a pressure point, knocking her out. Naruto seemed, "Come on, Haku. I went through all that trouble to fill the arena with water for you and you don't even use it." Everyone's sweat drops and the judge tells them their lineup will be announced at the finals in 1 month. I just wanted to say that I love all the reviews, and in this chapter some new surprises are going to show up. I did this to change the traditional storyline also. Now to answer a few questions about this story. This story takes place about 200 years after the night of the Old Republic game and has a few references to that. Force lightning is, from what I can tell, a neutral force power. The reason I say this: in Attack of the Closed, Yoda used it also against Dooku. As for me using the force persuasion mind trick on people, I admit the Root ABNU members are all idiots thanks to Danzo, so they are weak-minded. As for the guards outside the Hokage's office, if you stand somewhere for 6 to 10 hours a day, your mind wanders and makes it easier to have the power used on you from being bored. As for the idea of Naruto getting this strange occult training from other races to use plants in the water, I admit I might have went a little overboard with that, but considering the fact that they could not be described as an actual bloodline, for sure the possibility of having the force is not such a leap of faith as having multiple elemental affiliates, like for the first power earth and water and the second's double water. Now some of you might worry about the conflict that is coming up between Naruto and Darth Chaos. Chaos has been around for a while, so he will know some ninjutsu also, but they will be unique ones. Sasuke will die. Mark my words, Sasuke will die very painfully. Expect some major twist coming up and a surprise in 1 or 2 chapters. Now on with the story. Naruto walked up to Tenten and said, "So what do you plan to do? We might meet each other in the finals." Tenten said, "I just want to be with you." As they walked outside, they noticed that everyone who was just inside, besides the ones that could shushin away, had stopped for some reason. Naruto and Ino walked forward and gasped at the sight that was in front of them. 8 men lay on the ground, all dead. The funny thing about these 10 men is that 7 of them all had the same exact outfit on. Black cloaks with red clouds on them. The last man was Orochimaru, the very same man who attacked Team 7 a few days earlier. The most gruesome thing about the scene was that they were laid out in a pattern Naruto recognized, and each of them had his head sitting on his stomach. Naruto turned to Tenten and said, "Get the Hokage and as many people as you of our senseis as you can." Tenten nodded and took off as fast as she could. Naruto sighed and walked toward the bodies and noticed a note was in the middle of them under a rock. Naruto stepped over the bodies and grabbed the note and saw only one word on the envelope. Jedi. Naruto tore it open and started to read. "My dear Jedi, I have been after you and your family for more than 15 years now, and I have decided that it is time for us to finish this. I did not want you to be distracted by this petty war or my stupid followers that I tricked with simple displays of the Force, so I have ended their lives to give you the time to train and train you better, or I will blast this village to pieces from space. I want you to meet me on exactly October 10th on your 16th birthday by this planet's schedule at what is known on this world as the Valley of the Ends. It reminds me of my homeworld of Korriban. There we shall finish what has raged on since before either of us were born. I have lead you on a path of mazes ever since before you were born, boy. Your mother told you how I killed her sensei. Her sensei was my own twin sister. I knew everything she did, and I was the one who gave her master info on this planet and the descendants of Jedi. Those two fools were rumored to be direct disciples of Revan after he turned from the dark side and left the Republic for uncharted space. Your meeting with the Hutt as well as the ambush was all an act to lead you to this point. I knew how strong your mother was in the Force, and I had also met your father and helped arrange for their eventual meeting through a servant of mine on this planet. Nearly everything of your life has been set up for me to make you stronger so I could have a true challenge. I arranged all of that, including giving you one of my own droids so I could keep track of you. I know about your girlfriend and grandparents. I also set you up in Wave Country with the intercepted message. It is easy to trick the young and weak-minded. I also made it where you would suffer the loss of that creature inside of you. I have not had a real test of my power since I killed my own master nearly 25 years ago when I was 16, and I want to test myself again before I leave this galaxy. You are fighting for not only the survival of your village but the survival of everyone you have close to you and care for. I can't wait, Jedi. Show me which is truly the stronger. The power of the light side or the dark side of the Force. See you soon, boy, and remember that you have no choice but to fight and win against me, or everything you have will be destroyed. May the Force be with you. H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A. Darth Chaos. Naruto read the letter one more time before dropping it and start walking away. A few moments later, the third landed with Tenten and several of the Junin senseis. He looked at the ground and saw his former student as well as most of the top missing nin in the world, including Uchiha Itachi. The third said, "Does anyone know what happened?" Ino said, "We walked out here and found them, and Naruto walked over them and pulled out that note that's on the ground there and read it before walking away." The third walked over and picked up the note and read it and sighed. He turned to the Chunin hopefuls and said, "Prepare for the finals in 1 month and forget about all of this. It is just the ending of some missing nin." No one really believed him but started breaking up and heading home. Naruto walked until he got on top of the Hokage's monument and sat down looking over the village. After an hour of looking, he said, "I need some help from anyone. I just find out that my whole life has been set up as some sort of sick twisted play so some idiot can test himself. I wish you were here, Mom, or even you, Dad. I know I am not ready for this and I don't know where to begin." A voice from behind said, "If you get lost on the road of life, it helps if you go back to your roots and retrace what you know so you can go where you should be." Naruto turned and said, "I don't understand, Granny." Tsunade sat down and said, "I think you should go back and look at what you know to see what you don't. You have things around you now that can help you become stronger and smarter. You have a little over 3 years to get ready for this fight and only you can do it. You have me and the pervert. Your fiancé, some friends, a demon and the Force. How can you lose?" Naruto said, "But will it be enough?" Tsunade said, "Only time will tell and you must pray for the best and prepare for the worst. This guy is strong enough to kill people like Itachi and Orochimaru, then he is deadly. You are going to have to push yourself harder than ever. Become stronger, faster, more agile, and cunning. Just think about it and what you are truly going to be fighting for." As she got up and walked away, Naruto sat there thinking for a while. Finally, after sunset, he got up and walked to his home. When he got there, everyone was already in bed, so Naruto fixed him a sandwich and a glass of water before sitting on the back porch looking over the beautiful garden and the statues of the first Hokage with a tree growing beside him and the second Hokage holding the Raijin in his hands as well as several ornamental statues. Naruto ate and sat in peace trying to relax himself. After giving up trying to relax, he walked out to the garden and stood looking at his ancestors and said, "I bet you would know what to do if you were here." The moon came out from behind a cloud and shined down on the garden, and the ray of light passed through a hole in the region and caused a mark to appear on the statue of the first around his neck where his necklace was, except the actual jewel was missing. Naruto, who was looking at the two, saw this and at first thought it was a trick of light, but took a closer look at the first statue. When he did, he noticed that the jewel was not missing. Instead, it was an engraved hole that was in the shape. Naruto thought for a moment and took off the necklace he wore and put the jewel in the place where it should have been. After a few seconds of nothing happening, Naruto thought that it was just his mind playing games, so he removed the jewel and put it back on and started to walk back inside when he heard a rumbling noise behind him. He turned and saw the water fountain that was ground level before was now raised 10 feet into the air, and a door was on the side. Naruto turned and walked to the door and looked inside and saw a set of stairs leading down a tunnel made up of the same strange crystal where his ship first was. Naruto started walking down the stairs, and after about a 15-minute walk he entered a huge chamber with stone walls. Naruto looked around and saw a statue of the first like the one up top and walked over to it and did the same thing with the jewel. When it was inserted, a green light shined over the room and a hologram appeared of the first Hokage. The first hologram said, "Greetings. If you have found this place, then you should be one of my descendants. Is that true?" Naruto said, "Yes." The first said, "Are you a Jedi?" Naruto said, "Yes, I am." A second hologram appeared of the second Hokage and said, "What is your name, young one?" Naruto said, "Naruto Kazama. I am the grandson of Tsunade." The first said, "So you are my little granddaughter's grandchild. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Alex Roxty and this is my brother Brian. We were both Jedi Masters. We built this place when we came here as a refuge for Jedis to learn from us. We programmed a holocron with almost all of our knowledge and to help a Jedi to train with our interactive selves. Our master Revan told us to make this in case the Sith ever returned and attacked the Jedi Aegean." Naruto said, "Sadly they have returned and I have to face one in over 3 years." Brian said, "This temple can only be used once every 3 days for 6 hours. When you are not training here, you should prepare your mind and body for the training we will instruct you in. For now, I want you to sit in the circle in the center of the room and meditate with the force and lift the 4 pillars in each corner off the ground while meditating for you training." Naruto nodded and did as told, beginning his training. When Naruto was done, we walked outside the path, and after he was in the garden Aegean, it descended into the ground. Naruto went inside the house to get some sleep. The next day when Naruto got up and went downstairs, Jiraiya and Tsunade were waiting for him to finish breakfast, and he said, "If you are going to prepare for this, then you can't only rely on your Jedi skills. You must also work on your ninjutsu so that you can defeat him." Naruto nodded and said, "Brain and Alex told me as much." Tsunade said, "Who?" Naruto said, "Brain and Alex Roxty." Tsunade dropped her coffee cup and said, "How?" Naruto said, "They built a temple in the backyard and I accidentally discovered it last night. It's not actually them but holograms with almost all of their knowledge." Tsunade said, "Can I see it?" Naruto said, "Not for 3 more days." Tsunade said, "Why?" Naruto said, "The power source for it only lets it be used once every 3 days and for only 6 hours. I am planning on using that time to train with the force and the rest of the time working on my other skills." Jiraiya said, "What do you want to improve on?" Naruto said, "A wise woman told me I should work on everything from the beginning, so I need to work on everything. Ninjutsu, Genjutsu, Kenjutsu, Taijutsu, chakra control. Everything." Jiraiya said, "I think that whoever it was is full of shit, but if that's what you want, then." Anything else he was going to say was stopped when Tsunade put him through the floor. Naruto sighed and walked outside and said, "I will be back later." Before he went through some hand seals and took off slowly away from the house. Tsunade turned to Jiraiya recognizing the seals and said, "You gave him gravity seals." Jiraiya said, "Yes, but I don't know what he's up to." Naruto walked through the village and finally made it to where he was going. The Hokage's office. When Naruto arrived, he stood there and waited. The third sighed and said, "What can I do for you, Naruto?" Naruto said, "I have a couple of things to ask of you, sir." The third was on edge because of this and said, "Sir, what is so important for you to actually be respectful?" Naruto said, "Since I have access to my father's money now, I would like to hire some ninja." The third looked at him and said, "What would you be hiring them for?" Naruto said, "As I know you read that note, I have a little over 3 years to prepare. By some miracle I rather not go into right now. I have 2 Jedi Masters teaching me on a weird schedule that leaves me with a lot of free time, so I want to work on my other skills and would like to hire some ninja as private teachers." The third thought for a moment and said, "What would you like to learn in?" Naruto said, "I need nin, gen, ken, taijutsu as well as strategy and anything else I can learn with as many teachers as I can get." The third said, "You won't be able to be at more than one spot at a time to learn these things, and most instructors don't want large crowds around when they teach." Naruto said, "Well, for nin and gen I can use Kujbunshin's as well as the strategy. The Tia and Ken I can work a schedule around." The third said, "What kind of schedule you looking for?" Naruto said, "I will be working in the afternoons every 3 days with my Jedi teachers, so the day after can be Tia and the day before can be Ken, leaving the day for my Jedi training to rest and prepare to do it over with." The third said, "How long do you plan to work that kind of schedule?" Naruto said, "Until it's time for me to face him or I run out of money." The third said, "That's not a problem. I will have your Kenjutsu teacher meet you tomorrow as well as any available teachers for other skills. I will have them arrive every day at your house at 7 a.m. Good luck." Naruto nodded and walked out the room, still having trouble walking. When Naruto made it back to his house, it had been 2 hours. Jiraiya said, "Exactly how much gravity you have now?" Naruto said, 15. "Let's start training." Jiraiya said, "Where did you go anyways?" as they went to a training ground. Naruto said, "I hired every available ninja for training I could." Jiraiya said, "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Naruto said, "Let's begin." The next day when Naruto opened his door at 7, several people were there waiting for him. Naruto walked outside with an ABNU sword on his side and said, "I take it you are all here for the mission I requested. Please tell me your name and area of specialty." A man stepped forward with a sword on his back and said, "Hyade Kenjutsu." A woman with red eyes stepped forward and said, "Kurenai Genjutsu." A man smoking a cigarette said, "Asuma Strategy, Elemental Control and Hand-to-Hand." A man with black hair and looked like he was about to fall asleep said, "Shika Strategy." A man Naruto recognized stepped forward and said, "Ebu's Chakra Control and Jutsu." Naruto nodded and said, "Okay. I will make 10 clones for everyone but Hyade, who I will personally lead. I want to learn everything I can between now and my 16th birthday." Ebu said, "Exactly why that date?" Naruto said, "You heard about the missing nin that appeared the other day, dead, right? Well, the man that did that will be coming for me on that day to test his strength. If I fail to defeat him, he said he will destroy the Leaf Village." The few who did not know this paled. Asuma said, "The Hokage wanted me to tell you that your taijutsu teacher will be Guy." Naruto nodded and said, "Thank you," before creating the clones and starting his training. And so began Naruto training for the rest of the month, training under each of these teachers as well as Jiraiya every day from 7 in the morning till 7 in the evening. As for mission, all missions for anyone who was in the exams was cancelled, so he would have 1 or 2 teachers that had a mission and could not come, but he usually received a scroll to work with. Naruto would spend 2 hours in the evening after training with Tenten, just answering questions and spending time together. Finally, the day of the Chunin exams arrived. As Naruto arrived, he saw the other competitors there. Gaara, Tenten, Shikamaru, Neji, Kankuro, and Shino. Surprisingly, Sasuke and Duso was not there. Hyade coughed and said, "This will be the lineup since Duso withdrawed for some reason. as he held up a paper for everyone to see. Match 1 will be Kankuro vs Gaara. Match 2 will be Shino and Shikamaru. Match 3 will be Sasuke and Tenten. Match 4 will be Neji and Haku. Naruto will have the winner of round 3 match. Hiati said, now will the competitors for match 1 remain and the rest of you go to the waiting area. Everyone nodded and Tenten walked up beside Naruto and said, good luck Naru-kun. Naruto, who was humming, said, you as well Tenheim, and started to sing Aegean as he leaned against a wall and Tenten leaned back against him to watch the match with him holding her. She looked over at him and said, what is that you're humming? Naruto said, it's a song I was writing for you. Tenten looked intrigued and said, I never knew you could write music. Naruto said, Mom had me do something whenever I knew a real fight was going to happen to help me be calm. When I was younger, I would have my clones start playing music to express my emotions. Since my clones are me, they know what to play, but since the feeling I got from being with you has been getting so strong, I decided to write a new one just for when we are alone. Tenten blushed and said, you're doing that for me? Naruto said, yes, and after this is over I will play it for you. Tenten nodded as they heard Hiati say begin and Kankuro forfeit right away. She said, what do you think that's about? Naruto said, Gaara's a vessel like I am. He holds the one-tail raccoon. Kyuubi told me about it, but it slipped my mind till now. As they watched Shino and Shikamaru stand in the ring, Tenten said, how long do you think it will take? Naruto said, who knows? An hour later they were both standing there looking at each other and they both raised their hands at the same time and said, I quit. The crowd became furious and started throwing stuff into the arena. Just then Sasuke walked in alone and Tenten kissed Naruto and said, wish me luck. When Tenten made it to the arena floor, Sasuke was standing with his arms crossed and smirked. Tenten said, what are you so happy about? Sasuke extended his hand and said, I wish to honor you as a worthy opponent in these matches unlike most of the other users, so how about we agree to a handshake as equals before the match? Tenten was unsure of it and finally extended her hand since the actual match had not started yet. When she shook his hand and tried to pull OT away, Sasuke smirked and refused to let go before yanking her forward with all of his strength and revealing the kunai in his concealed hand and stabbed her in the chest. Everyone was stunned because that was the most underhanded stunt anyone ever pulled. Hiati said, you're disqualified, Sasuke. Angrily as a blur appeared and caught Tenten before she fell to the ground. Naruto had her in his arms trying to stop the bleeding when a snap hiss caused him to look up. He saw Sasuke holding a pair of lightsabers. One he recognized as Tenten's, but the other he never seen before. Tsunade appeared beside Naruto and started working on healing her and looked at the lightsabers and gasped before saying, Raijin, but how? It was stolen several years ago. Sasuke said, my new teacher Danzo was very influential in getting this for me as well as forcing Kakashi to teach me what he should have all along. The third appeared next to Naruto and Tsunade and said, what is the meaning of this, Sasuke? Sasuke said, revenge. My revenge was stolen from me by the guy who wants to fight Naruto, so I was given an offer that if I was able to kill Naruto I would be able to show everyone I am stronger and fight the guy who killed my brother. I figured the best way to do it is also take away from Naruto the most important thing in his life. It's no use trying to heal her. That blade was poisoned with a rare poison that Danzo assured me could not be cured. Tsunade, who had healed the wound, said, he's right. I can't do anything about the poison. Naruto was upset and started to really become angry when Kyuubi said, Kit, I can save her, but you must do what I tell you. Put your hand over her heart and start pumping my chakra into her. Naruto thought, but what about? Kyuubi interrupted and yelled, do it, she does not have much time. Don't worry, everything will be okay. Hurry. Naruto turned and put his hand over Tenten's heart and was covered in a red chakra that all the adults in the arena knew was Kyuubi and started to get scared. The red chakra slowly started to cover Tenten's body and the two forms of red chakra started to merge together, and Naruto, who had his eyes closed concentrating, and Tenten, who was out cold from the wound in trauma, slowly started to rise above the ground and their bodies started to spin slowly. Everyone was stunned seeing someone floating into the sky about 60 feet in the air. The two that were spinning became blurs and all anyone could see was the red glow from them. After a few minutes there was a massive explosion of power, and when everyone could see Eiji and Naruto and Tenten were slowly floating toward the ground and were kissing, holding the other in each other's arms. When they parted, Naruto and Tenten both opened their eyes and heard someone clapping slowly with sarcasm. They both turned and saw it was Sasuke. He said, "I see you saved your whore, but I still will kill you now," and reactivated the lightsabers. Naruto turned to him but not before Tenten said, "Be careful." The third said, "I did not authorize this match." Danzo appeared in the arena and said, "I would let it continue if I was you, unless you want your grandson and Kakashi to be killed," along with 3 men holding Kakashi and Konohamaru. The third said, "When this is over you will be killed for treason, Danzo." Danzo smirked and said, "I doubt that, right, Cage?" The Cage appeared beside Danzo and said, "Yes, my weapon will kill everyone here." Naruto snorted and said, "Gaara is not your weapon, and if he wants I can shut that damn Shukaku up with a proper seal like he should have had." "Yes, I know all about it. I found out about the berserker seal you had placed on him to make them both go crazy, and how you made it kill your wife, or should I say one of them. I bet your kids don't know that you have 3 other wives and never cared about their mother." The Cage said, "What are you talking about, boy?" Naruto said, "I must admit it was a pretty guarded secret, but my grandfather Jiraiya is real good at information gathering, and several members of your council have loose lips, especially for signed copies of Ika Ika Paradise." The Cage said, "I will kill you, boy," and charged at Naruto only to be stopped by a wall of sand. Gaara appeared and said, "Can you really stop the voices?" Naruto nodded and Gaara said, "I have been waiting for this day all my life," and inkas the Cage in his sand and crushed him faster than you could say white lightning. Naruto turned to Sasuke, who was getting impatient, and said, "Hokage-sama. I wish for an exhibition fight between me and Sasuke to settle this once and for all. No rules. Last one standing is the winner." The third sighed and said, "Fine. You deal with him and I will try to deal with Danzo and rescue those other 2. Naruto snorted and waved his hand and said, "You will release them." All 3 men said, "We will release them," and let go. Naruto waved his hands Aegean and said, "You will turn yourself into Ibiki." They said, "We must turn ourselves into Ibiki," and left only for Abnu to grab them and take them away. Danzo said, "What the hell did you do, demon?" Naruto said, "I used the force to control their minds. Only weak-minded fools would follow, you idiot, so I could control them like that." Kakashi started going through seals and grabbed his right hand and said, "This is for Rin in my book," and charged Danzo with a Chidori. Danzo tried to dodge but was unable to before he found Kakashi's hand through his chest. Everyone's sweat dropped and Guy appeared beside Kakashi and said, "Why did you do that?" Kakashi said, "To make me do what he wanted to. He held Rin prisoner and also burned each page of my book in front of me before threatening to kill Rin in front of me also." Naruto sighed and backflipped from a lightsaber slash coming at him and said, "Impatient, aren't we, Sasuke?" Sasuke said, "Let's settle this like ninja freak," and put both lightsabers on his belt. Naruto nodded and said, "Ladies first, Sasuke-chan." Sasuke went through seals and did the Kaden Grand Fireball Jutsu. Naruto sighed and brought his hand up and used water from under the ground to block the fireball, only to have to dodge as 3 kuniyas that were hidden in the fireball came at him. Naruto smiled and went through his own seals before saying Sweden, Sujinheki, water release, water encampment wall, and went through some more before saying Raiden, electric encampment wall, and put his hand on the water wall surrounding him and Sasuke. Sasuke said, "What did you do that for, idiot?" Naruto said, "That was to make sure you could not run. Now let's end this," and got into a Taijutsu stance that no one recognized. Sasuke got into the Uchiha Interceptor style stance and smirked as they both charged at each other. Naruto was easily dodging all of Sasuke's strikes. Finally, after 5 minutes of not going anywhere, he was panting and said, "Why can't I touch you?" Naruto smiled and looked at Kakashi and said, "You are an idiot, Sasuke. You may have forced Kakashi to teach you, but what good is it if your body cannot keep up? Kakashi may have showed you jutsu, but without the speed to use them, you're helpless." Sasuke became enraged and started making seals for Chidori. When he grabbed his wrist, Naruto pulled out 20 Hiraishin kuniyas and threw them around the circle they were trapped in. Sasuke started charging, but to Naruto it was actually slow. Naruto waited and dodged the first strike of the Chidori, causing Sasuke to hit the wall of water and electric and getting shocked himself. Naruto waited as he did it again and tripped Sasuke, causing him to fall face first into the water, causing a electric burn on his face. Sasuke quickly got back and had his Sharingan on and said, "I will kill you, Dobi," and pulled a kunai and charged a third time. Naruto waited till Sasuke got close and started flashing around the circle and punch or kicking Sasuke every time he reappeared. After 2 minutes of this, Sasuke finally used his feet to stop himself with chakra, and when Naruto appeared he breathed out a Kaden, Grand Fireball Jutsu, in Naruto. Naruto quickly brought water away from the wall that was holding them. As the steam rose from the two elements clashing, Sasuke charged through it with a kunai in each hand. Naruto brought his own out and the two began a knife fight. Both getting cuts on their arms. Naruto's would heal instantly though. As the blood on Sasuke's arms started to get thicker from the amount losing, he grabbed some and started going through Han seals before saying, "Kuchio's no jutsu," summoning technique, and a 20-foot tall bear appeared under Sasuke. Naruto quickly went through his own and summoned a black frog with 2 swords on his back. Naruto then said, "Give me some oil," as he went through another set of seals. Sasuke started copying the seals and breathed out a fireball at the oil. Now think about this. A shitload of oil flying at you which is flammable, and you ignite it directly in front of you. Needless to say, Sasuke's hair and a good portion of his hair. I did forget to mention that the bear he was standing on now had a bald mohawk going down its back to Sasuke's location. Did I also forget to mention the bear's name was Razin and he happened to be the boss summon. The bear turned to Sasuke and slashed him across the chest with its claws. Sasuke never earned the boss's respect and was Danzo's summon. Razin quickly left after cutting each of Sasuke's limbs with his claws, leaving permanent scars. Naruto, who was sweat dropping at this, said, "You could screw up a wet dream, couldn't you, Sasuke-chan?" Sasuke was sort of delusional at this point from blood loss and said, "What, Itachi? I am not a boy. You mean we don't cut it off?" At this, every guy grabbed themselves and started looking scared for life. Finally, after sucking his thumb for about 10 seconds, coherent thought returned to Sasuke and he pulled out both of the lightsabers he had and charged at Naruto but had not activated them yet. To this day I still don't know if it was the blood loss or the mental trauma or just him being an idiot, but you see, when he activated them he was holding them backwards. One stabs him in the right shoulder, and when he let go of it to grab his wound it cut downward and cut his arm clean off. He was still running, and when the one he had in his right hand hit the ground it bounced just an inch, but that inch caused the blade to pass through both his feet as he ran, causing himself to fall. That would have been enough to end it all, but from throwing his kunai to summon earlier, the kunai landed upside down with the point sticking up. It went right between his eyes, killing him. That stunt earned Sasuke the nickname for history books to use as the unluckiest ninja. Naruto walked over and got the 2 lightsabers and walked over to Tenten. She pulled him into a hug and then kissed him passionately. The third sighed and said, "Seeing as the exams have turned out like they did, I am going to cancel the rest of the exams." Jiraiya walked over and told Gaara he would fix the seal. Naruto and Tenten started to walk toward the exit and Tenten said, "So what do you want to do now?" Naruto was staring off into space and Tenten asked, "What's wrong?" Naruto said, "Are you okay?" Tenten said, "Yes, thanks to you." Naruto shook his head and said, "No, Kyuubi did it. He told me how to save you and gave me the power to do it." Tenten put her hand to her mouth and said, "But he..." Naruto stopped her and said, "He said he wanted his death to mean something and to go out with a sense of purpose instead of just fading away. It was his choice, so don't feel bad." Tenten nodded and they continued to walk. Tenten was feeling bad and not noticing where they were going. When she looked up, she noticed that there was a beautiful waterfall and they had walked a ways away from the village. She asked, "Where are we?" Naruto led her under a tree and said, "Tenten, when I saw you get hurt, I felt like my life was ending. I wanted to give up and die. I don't want to know what it is like not to have you in my life. I finished that song and I would like for you to hear it now." Tenten nodded and Naruto created 20 clones and 8 of them changed into instruments and 4 of them changed to look different as the last 8 grabbed the instruments. Then a soft sound slowly filled the air. Tenten closed her eyes as the music filled the air and leaned her head on his shoulders to slowly dance to the music. Then she heard it. "I could stay awake just to hear you breathing. Watch you smile while you are sleeping. While you're far away dreaming. I could spend my life in this sweet surrender. I could stay lost in this moment forever. Every moment spent with you is a moment I treasure." She opened her eyes and looked into his eyes and their lips met and they embraced each other as their hands slowly trailed the other's body as they only focused on the music and each other. "Don't want to close my eyes. I don't want to fall asleep. 'Cause I miss you, baby. And I don't want to miss a thing. 'Cause even when I dream of you, the sweetest dream will never do. I still miss you, baby. And I don't want to miss a thing." Naruto slowly laid her on the ground and they held each other passionately kissing as the music continued. The only thing they were thinking of was the feeling of the one they cared for. The moment continued and both felt the desire of the other. Finally giving into the moment, all that mattered was each other. Lying close to you, feeling your heart beating. And I am wondering what you're dreaming. Wondering if it's me you're seeing. Then I kiss your eyes. And thank God we're together. I just want to stay with you in this moment forever. Forever and ever. Don't want to close my eyes. I don't want to fall asleep. 'Cause I miss you, baby. And I don't want to miss a thing. 'Cause even when I dream of you, the sweetest dream will never do. I still miss you, baby. And I don't want to miss a thing. I don't want to miss one smile. I don't want to miss one kiss. I just want to be with you. Right here with you, just like this. I just want to hold you close. Feel your heart so close to mine. And just stay here in this moment. For all the rest of time. Don't want to close my eyes. I don't want to fall asleep. 'Cause I miss you, baby. And I don't want to miss a thing. 'Cause even when I dream of you, the sweetest dream will never do. I still miss you, baby. And I don't want to miss a thing. Don't want to close my eyes. I don't want to fall asleep. I don't want to miss a thing." When the song had ended, the music continued just the instrumental part and the two held each other, not letting go, afraid that letting go would cause them to lose the other. After about 20 minutes, Naruto said, "Tenten, I don't want to live another moment of my life without you. I want to marry you today." Tenten, who was holding him close, said, "Yes. I don't want to lay alone without holding you, Aegean, either. I never felt more complete than I do now." Naruto and Tenten quickly got dressed and went to the Hokage's office. After explaining to him they wanted to get married then and there, he agreed but summoned both of their families. That day Naruto and Tenten became husband and wife. Life became one of routine after that for both. Naruto trained heavily, as did Tenten. Both made Chunin at the next exams. Gaara became Kazekage. The third retired and Tsunade took over. Naruto took his family seat on the council. 3 months after becoming Chunin, he became Junin. Tsunade wanted him to become a sensei of a genin team, but he failed all teams because they refused to get along and work as a team. 1 year after getting married, Tenten became pregnant and 9 months later had a son, Arashi Dustin Kazama. Naruto hardly left her side and earned more respect from the village by not only his council work but also his missions he completed. Naruto trained extra hard as the time for the meeting to arrive drew near. Even though he still trained every day, he made sure that he spent time with his wife and son. As the time got closer, more ninja and villagers let him know they were supporting him. Now he laid in bed. Tomorrow was the day that he has been preparing for. Tomorrow either he would win and live happily or he would die along with everyone he cared for. Naruto looked at his lovely wife and remember all the times of happiness he has since she came into his life. A cry from the crib drew his attention and he got out of bed and picked up his son and held him close, rocking him until he fell asleep. Slowly the sun started to rise and he put his sleeping son back in the crib before kissing him and then his wife before leaving the house, not making a sound. He had prepared for today and it was time to see if his preparations were enough.